Okay, so now we move on. We're going to talk about what did the Sahaba do to preserve the Hadith. So now the Sahaba, they obviously listened to the Hadith of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to a great deal. Some Sahaba, they didn't even have a job just so that they can learn more Hadith, like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. And some of them, they were engaged in business, but they would take turns with other people, like Umar radiallahu anhu. What he would do is he had an agreement with his neighbor. One day he told his neighbor that on every alternate day, I will go and spend my day with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and learn everything from him. If a new ayah was revealed or whatever he said, I'll gather all of that and I'll bring it back to you. You go to work on that day. The next day, I'm going to go to work and you go to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, do the same thing. And then they would meet up at night and they would share all that information. So the Sahaba had to work out a way to study with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Some Sahaba like Abu Hurairah, he didn't have a job. He was very poor. He just sat in the masjid and waited for people to give him food because he wanted to spend every moment trying to memorize the hadith. And there's many stories of Abu Hurairah you might have heard that he really wanted food because he was so hungry. They wouldn't have anything stored. And there's actually a miracle of Abu Hurairah. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I forgot how, but he had a bag of dates, a small bag, a pouch. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made dua for him or something like that. And so years after Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away, that bag of dates would never finish. Abu Hurairah's bag of dates. So he would just put his hand in the bag of dates and eat it. He would never count it. He would never look at it. And he would give it to people. He was like, here, have a date. And then he would eat the date and it would never finish. But then when Uthman radiallahu anhu was killed, then it finished. And the barakah of the ummah went away, they say. So his bag of dates, the barakah stopped there. So, there's all these miracles. This is a miracle of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, so the Sahaba would try their best to, take from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and preserve from him. Now, what are some things that helped them? Right, so we're going to look at 6 factors that helped the Sahaba in their preservation of Hadith. So now we're actually looking at what are practical things that the Sahaba did for Hadith in specifically. So why were they so good in preserving the Hadith? Number 1, obviously their excellent memory. So one thing which is noted about the Arabs is they had excellent memory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them this way. And it's commonly seen that if you take a certain means away from a person, the body and the system of a human will compensate. For instance, you might have heard that if blind people have excellent hearing, right? Blind people have really good memories as well. You'll find them memorizing everything because they can't read anymore, so they have to retain. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes a means away from a person, the different aspects of a person compensate. So most of the Sahaba and the Arabs at that time, they didn't know how to read or write. Almost all of them. You could count the ones that could read and write among them. And they probably learned it from some other person elsewhere. So it was very rare. So due to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them very strong memories. Before the time of in Jahiliyyah, they would pass on stories and they would recite poetry to one another. So it was not uncommon to find someone who they can listen to like 100 lines of poetry one time and repeat it back to you, verbatim. And a testament to this is once the Khalifa Marwan bin Hakam, he heard about Abu Hurairah's memory. It was famous, Abu Hurairah's memory. And obviously the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made a special dua for Abu Hurairah as well, for his memory. So Marwan bin Hakam, he wanted to test him. So he called him and he said, narrate some ahadith to me. So he sat him in a place and there was like a curtain and then there was some scribe on the other side that Abu Hurairah did not know about. So the scribe wrote down all the hadith that Abu Hurairah narrated. So then a year later, Marwan bin Hakam called him and he said, could you repeat those hadith that you said to me a year ago? And the scribe was sitting there with a book and he repeated them the same order, verbatim, the same words, everything. His memory was so sharp. So it was not just for him. Many of the Sahaba had this capability where they had excellent memory. So that is something that you do find. Like I mentioned before, there are variations in words here and there. So not every Sahabi had, perfect memory, like photographic memory. But you won't find huge mistakes among the Sahaba. Like if you compare narrations about one incident, you won't find contradicting reports. They were very strong in their memory. The second thing is that they felt a responsibility to preserve Islam. They knew their position. Like Ibn Mas'ud was saying, that the Sahaba were sent to preserve the mission of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And like the dua that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told them that, preserve this deen. I'm going to give it to you, and I need you guys to take it and give it to the next generation. And he made dua for them. And so then they were prepared to do that. And in one hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Ballighu anni walau ayah." Spread from me whatever you can, even if it is a verse. So many of the Sahaba, they would spread whatever Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave them. Number 3, they had reverence for Hadith. The Sahaba loved the Hadith. They knew it was the advices of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And we'll talk about Amr bin al-As and what he did, or Abdullah bin Amr bin al-As. He actually wrote down the Hadith of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, so there's many different narrations here. I'm just going to skip them. But we all know how they revered Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam aided the Sahaba. He spoke clearly, he was deliberate, he would repeat his words 3 times for them. He didn't have long speech, right? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wouldn't talk for very long. Sometimes he would here and there, but those were not the usual cases. Aisha radiallahu anha says that he would speak in such a way that if someone wanted to count his words, he would be able to do so. Like, it was so clear when he would speak. He didn't rush in his speech. So that helped the Sahaba. And in one narration, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would not rattle his words as used people do. His speech was clear and to the point. If someone wanted to memorize it, they would be able to do so. So his speech was so beautiful and so succinct that you can memorize his words. And number 5 is his speech was very attractive. He had very poetic speech. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was very poetic in his speech. He says in one hadith that utitu jawami al-kalim. I was granted concise speech from Allah. It's one of the miracles of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his own speech. Right? We said that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's speech is not a mu'jiza. Mu'jiza is a miracle that has a challenge to it. And this is a general miracle that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had. Okay, and the last thing that helped the Sahaba was writing down hadith. So let's talk about writing down hadith. Now, did the Sahaba write down the hadith or not? Was it written in the lifetime of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Generally, we understand that no, we don't have books of the Sahaba. Earliest books you have, maybe after 100 Hijri, you have some of those books. You do have some letters here and there, but you don't have books written by Sahaba. You don't have this book and the Sahabi's name, he authored it. We don't have that. So now the question is, were the hadith written or not? So Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, he says that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said, there was no companion of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam more well versed in hadith than me, Abu Hurairah said. Like, I was the best in hadith. He's known as the muhaddith of the Sahaba, Abu Hurairah. He narrates the most out of all Sahaba. Most of the time, if you look at a hadith, it will say Abu Hurairah. So he says there was no Sahabi more well versed in hadith than me, except Abdullah bin Amr, because he used to write and I didn't write. So now Abdullah bin Amr bin al-As, he would write the hadith down. He is one Sahabi, he would write hadith. Okay, so there's more narrations about that, like how he would do this. I'll narrate another one. Imam Abu Dawood, he recorded from Abdullah bin Amr that he said, I used to write everything I heard from Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that I wanted to memorize. So he would sit there with a pen and like a quill and some like leather or something like that. He would write down as Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam spoke, and then he would memorize it. So Abu Hurairah is saying that I couldn't beat him, Abdullah bin Amr. And then he says, the Quraysh reprimanded me, saying, do you write everything when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or Muhammad is a man who speaks in anger and happiness? Why are you writing everything? That means he used to write everything. And they're criticizing him. He's like, he's just a man. He gets angry, he gets happy. Why are you writing all this stuff down? So then he said, so I stopped writing. I then mentioned this incident to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he pointed to his blessed mouth and he said, write, by him in whose hands lies my life, nothing exits from it except the truth. So he said, don't stop, keep writing it. So he gave him permission. He said, keep writing as you're writing. So he would write and he would memorize. We're going to talk about his book, what it was called, and do we still have that or not? So there was a book. Abdullah bin Umar, he had a book of hadith. It's in Bukhari, it's in Abu Dawood, these narrations regarding that. But some people, they have an objection, right? So, however, that is challenged by the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, recorded by Imam Muslim and Ahmad, that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, do not write anything from me except Quran. Whosoever has written anything from me other than Quran should erase it. So in this hadith, it's also authentic, it's in Muslim. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, don't write. But previously he just said, write. And he says, only write the Quran, don't do anything else. So now, we'll answer this objection here before Salatul Maghrib. There's a few answers that we can give. In reality, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did give permission to write. And some Ṣaḥābah wrote the hadith from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But unfortunately, we don't have them anymore. We don't have, in written form, we don't have their books. We have it in transmission. So we can trace back and find those narrations of Abdullah bin Umar, but we do it through the chain of narration, not through his. We don't like have a book of Abdullah bin Umar. So now, what is the answer? So, right? Everyone understand the objection? The objection is that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told Abdullah bin Umar, go ahead and write. And he used to write. But there's another hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri saying that, don't write, only write Quran. If you wrote anything else, erase it. I don't want you to write anything other than Quran. So now, the first answer is that when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told them not to write, this was early on in Islam, like in the days of Makkah and the very early stages. So he said, don't write. And then later, Allah gave him permission, and so he said, okay, now you can write from me. So at the end, it was permissible to write from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So in the beginning, it was prohibited. Later on, it was allowed. So it's abrogated. So these are some examples. Ali radiallahu anhu had a book. So now there's some hadith in Sahih Bukhari and things like that where Ali radiallahu anhu is saying that even the Shia were alive in his time. In Ali radiallahu anhu's time, the Shia were there. Like, they were not like the Shias of today's time. Shias means the supporters of Ali. So some people who were just extreme in their support for Ali radiallahu anhu. So he started hearing about them and the wild things that they were saying about him. And so they said that he has divine knowledge, or he has like this special knowledge that no one has. Then Ali radiallahu anhu told the people that, listen, I don't have anything special except for this book. And so then they were like, what's in the book? And it was just rulings that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave. So like, if someone murders another person, what is the punishment? And if someone, how much to give in zakat, and all of those hadith he compiled, and he had a book. But it was general knowledge, it wasn't special. So he was telling them, look, I don't have special knowledge. So the prohibition is abrogated. If it was prohibited to write, why does Ali radiallahu anhu have a book? Then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, before he passed away, in his maradul maut, when he was about to pass away, when his family was around him, he was coming in and out of consciousness. He asked them for a piece of paper. He said, bring me someone who can write, bring me some paper. He wanted to write down some instructions to the Ṣaḥābah. But then he went in and out of consciousness, and then something occurred, and he said, okay, forget about it, I'm not going to do it. Umar radiallahu anhu was telling the other Ṣaḥābah that, no, don't, let him rest. Don't pressure him. Because they started arguing in front of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he said, okay, let me settle this, just bring me some parchment, someone write this down. And then he fell out of consciousness. And Umar said that you guys stop arguing in front of him, just leave him alone. And then he changed his mind. But the fact that he was ready to do it and he called for paper to be written, that means he's ready for them to write down his words. Right? So it's allowed. And another incident is this person named Abu Shah radiallahu anhu. He was a Sahabi in the Hajjatul Wada', right, the final Hajj of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. When he was given a speech, one Sahabi, he stood up and he said, I can't remember all this. He's like, can you have this written down for me? You're saying so many good things. I'm not going to remember this. So then he said that someone write for Abu Shah. They said, Uktubu li Abi Shah. Someone write for him. So then they had the whole speech written out for him. Hajjatul Wada speech was given to Abu Shah. Someone wrote it down for him. The other Sahaba, notice though, they didn't have a problem. The normal Sahaba, they could memorize it easily. They're like, okay, we got it. Their memories were sharp. He was an outlier. He was like, I can't do this. And so then they had it written down for him. Another example, Ibn Amr, the one that we just talked about. He had a book of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's hadith. This was called Sadiqa. Sadiqa, anyone knows what Sadiqa means? Sadiqa? Have you heard anyone named Sadiqa? Yes? Yeah, the truthful. Sadiq. Sidq means truthful. So Sadiqa is feminine. As-Sahifatu Sadiqa. The truthful book. That's what it was called. He had a name for his book. He had a book of narrations. It had a name. We don't have it anymore. But we have a certain chain. Amr bin Shu'ayb an Abihi an Jaddihi. If you find that sanad, it's usually going to be from Sahifa Sadiqa. Basically, Amr bin al-As, his son is Abdullah bin Amr. His great-grandson is the one that he narrates a lot from this. But it was lost later on. But we still have those chains. We can still trace it back to Amr bin al-As or Abdullah bin Amr. Anyway, so that's one answer we can give why it was prohibited in the beginning, and then later on, writing was allowed. So we're talking about here, is writing hadith permissible or not? Number two, another answer is the prohibition is for writing anything extra in the margins of Quran. So this is taken out of context. So when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, do not write anything other than Quran, if you wrote anything other than Quran, then erase it. It's likely he was talking to the scribes at the time. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he received Quran, he would have scribes and they would write the Quran down. So what some people didn't, because they didn't have paper back then, they didn't have parchment, they had leather. And different paper was really expensive. Only paper came into the ummah like much later. They didn't have that. They had camel skins, bones, leaves. They would write on all these things. Maybe clothes. They would write on that. So what they would do to save space is they would have their copy of the Quran, and if there's a dua, they would write it in the margin. If there's tafsir, they would write it on the side, because they didn't have different books. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, don't do that. Just if you write Quran, just write the Quran. Don't write anything else. If you wrote anything else, erase it. Because later on, you might know what that is. Someone who's going to inherit your book, they're going to think it's an ayah. They're going to fuse it part of the Quran. So don't do that. So that's what the hadith is actually talking about. There's no prohibition of writing the hadith. Another answer some scholars give is that he prohibited the Ṣaḥābah out of mercy. Why? Because most of the Ṣaḥābah didn't know how to write. And if he's telling them to write, if he told them write, then they would be like, okay, I can't write, I feel bad. Or some of them would write and they would do a bad job. So he's like, you don't have to write. So he says, don't write for me, because he knows they can't write. And number four, the prohibition is so people will not prefer hadith over Quran. And many scholars prefer this last answer. The reason why Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to prohibit writing hadith is that he needed people to write the Quran and establish the Quran at that time. Hadith could be done later on, which was the case. So he's telling people, don't write right now, just write Quran, focus on the Quran, establish that. Later on, people will write the hadith. And so that's what occurred. All right, so we can take a 5-minute break, inshallah, with questions. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the first rules the Ṣaḥābah made for hadith.